Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the podcast show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Mark Adams. Mark is the Chief Executive Officer of Community Integrated Care. Now, Mark has had a wealth of experience and is highly respected within the international healthcare sector. He's renowned for his passion, his integrity, his innovation, and consistently strives for excellence. He's got a very strong commercial background and has a very solid focus when it comes to quality assured professional governance. Never has there been a more interesting time to be speaking with Mark, actually, because of the unprecedented times that we are facing at the moment. So really thrilled to have him join us today on the podcast show to understand a little bit more about what he's been up to and also his personal background. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks, Leila. Nice to be here.
Lovely to have you here. And when I reached out to you, I have to say, I did not realize it would be at such unprecedented times that are COVID-19. And Mark, I know that you are kind of pretty much with your teams absolutely at the forefront of supporting the not only the health sector, but also those who are in particularly difficult times or the vulnerable of us amongst the population. And I wonder, before we kind of dive headfirst into talking about, inclusion and the impact on your sector and yourself, whether you might be able to share with us a little bit about what you and the teams have been doing in response to COVID and how we can perhaps learn from some of the methodologies that you guys and girls are adapting to at the moment.
Yes, certainly, Leila. I mean, it's hard to believe that sort of 5 or 6 weeks ago, we were in our offices really sort of operating on a business as usual basis. The charity that I've got the honour of leading has a team of 6,000 people, and we provide support to just under 4,000 either individuals that are living with dementia or people perhaps with autism, Down syndrome, mental health issues and such like. Of course, these are the very people that perhaps can be most adversely affected by COVID-19. So we've had to try and lock down our premises to try and keep the virus out, whilst at the same time going through a massive reorganisation of our support services. A few weeks ago, we had maybe 300 or 400 people working in a traditional office-based environment, managing supply lines and the usual things that back office teams do. Now we've got everybody on sort of home working. The use and embracing of technology has never been done so enthusiastically or comprehensively. And obviously the key is to make sure that the guys on the front line are fully supported where they see an improvement in support, not a degradation of support.
Thanks so much for sharing. And I think what you talk about there, and I should congratulate you as well and your teams, because I think what the charity does is absolutely phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So huge well done there. But I wonder, mental health obviously has been hugely talked about, not only within the general population in inverted commas, but I think the taboo is starting to fortunately be lifted a little around mental health, and certainly those within business and wider organisations actually speaking out about it. But how are you managing to cope with teams, with those that are suffering from some of the more severe and perhaps physical mental health pieces around things like dementia and obviously Down syndrome? How are individuals like that able to help? And if we have got individuals like that within our families, within our businesses, how should we be perhaps adapting to supporting them when it comes to COVID?
Well, I mean, there's a number of strands there. I mean, I think the first thing, most people don't understand how the National Health Service and social care interplays. Obviously, the National Health Service has got something like 1.2 million staff, and it really is the Cinderella of the healthcare system, where it doesn't get seen as much as its kind of more glamorous sibling. And you've tended to have people perhaps operating on low incomes, providing incredible life-changing care to the people they support, but really being the unsung heroes. Now, at the best of times, it was a tough job to do, suddenly when you're also running the risk of, effectively going into homes where maybe there's been an outbreak of COVID-19, you've got exactly the same issues with regards to personal protection equipment and concern about your own safety. But unlike being in a national health service where if you're sick, you've got quite generous terms and conditions about maintaining your salary, often people in social care would go straight onto statutory sick pay. So if you actually are trying to care for someone's grandmother or mother or father or brother or sister, and you unfortunately get sick because of something like COVID-19, not only have you risked your health, but suddenly you perhaps can't pay your rent and you can't look after your own family. So you're absolutely right. This does have implications on the mental health and well-being of our team. We have about 10% of our staff over and above the normal absenteeism that you'd expect, who are self-isolating. And obviously, when someone is through that self-isolating 7 or 14 days, it's just remarkable that they're coming straight back into work to help their colleagues because they have that same vocational call to action that colleagues in the NHS do. So my hope is that when we are through this, is that social care will get the credit that it really deserves.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. And I love how you describe that there as the unsung hero and the Cinderella of the healthcare system, because you're absolutely right. And, I hate to kind of negatively confess this, but I do not know myself as much about social care as I do about the NHS. It certainly is far less publicised. I have a good friend who does run, up in Manchester actually, a social care organisation, lots of people who are kind of on zero contracts. So again, do wonder how they are coping. But, often these are individuals who are facing, from my limited knowledge, a huge amount of the same issues, yet often with a huge amount less funding and less support and less public exposure. And so hopefully we can do more, through this podcast, through Dial Global, to be able to help support all of those who are working within social care, because I really do think that, this is work that's absolutely critical, and it does actually affect everyone in the nation, really, because we all know someone who is affected by mental health. We all know someone, if not within our own family, but friends of friends or those within work who are suffering, whether it be with elderly parents who maybe have dementia or have, some of the more, obvious physical disabilities related to mental health, such as those that you mentioned previously.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, I guess moving on to some of the other aspects of kind of inclusion, and obviously inclusion, I'm sure, is at the heart of what you do. I wonder whether, before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the conversation, whether you might just be able to kind of explain a little to our listeners who know perhaps a little less, one, about social care and a little less, two, about yourself, because you have had a really interesting career when it comes to being in healthcare for many decades. And I wonder whether you might be able to give us a bit of a potted nutshell about how you came to be where you are today, before we kind of go into the wonderful world of inclusion, social care, and various other pieces that might help our listeners.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate that I've spent now sort of 35 years in healthcare. Years ago, my father was a manager, a director of the British Medical Association. I grew up with doctors and dentists as family friends, and I guess I ended up in a career in healthcare management really from a very young age. I have probably had a sort of mixture of large corporate and small entrepreneurial background. I had my own consulting company in my sort of mid-20s, helping doctors and dentists to run their practices. I got asked to sell that business to join a much larger healthcare organisation. So I sort of moved from the northwest down to the south coast, and in short order found myself running organisations from Demplan in dentistry to its parent company PPP Healthcare, now AXA PPP, BMI Hospitals, Virgin Healthcare, to name a few. And I guess that every time I was asked to take on a bigger role, I went through that same imposter syndrome, where you think, well, what do you see in me that I don't see in myself? And, am I going to get caught out and finally uncovered for not being as good as you think I am? And, one way or another, I've had a career where I've managed to just about do what people ask me to do, made my mistakes along the way, but hopefully had a career where, you make mistakes once and learn from it, and that helps you to become a better leader.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing. And like you, I too suffer with a huge amount of imposter syndrome. I'm sure many of our listeners do. And it's one of those invisible traits, which I think I always find it incredibly endearing and really quite wonderful when leaders like yourself, who have made it up to that kind of, the upper echelons of management, as some people call it, and, get up to CEO level, and indeed having, kind of worked way up in corporates and such like, are willing to actually share with others that they have been vulnerable at times of their career. I think the time that individuals, even at senior level, who stop kind of feeling this imposter syndrome almost, are, it's a time where, they almost, I don't know, they to a degree kind of stop learning, because I think actually we should always feel, a little tiny bit, inferior at some point, because if we don't feel that kind of that want and will to learn more and to better ourselves, it's very hard to keep on striving on to become more senior, or to be able to broaden our knowledge almost. But I think imposter syndrome is one of those invisible diversities that is absolutely critical, and I'm very, very pleased that you have shared that. It's interesting, because I hear more CEOs say that they suffer with imposter syndrome than I do those who are working their way up the ladder. And whether that is because they don't feel they've made it yet, therefore they don't want to share, or whether it is because the more senior you get, the bigger that imposter syndrome actually becomes, I'm not sure. But very, very interesting indeed.
I think almost the key, I think, to being a good leader is not forgetting where you come from, because if you are going to be entrusted to kind of lead the strategic direction of an organization, it helps if you can remember the times that you've taken a course that hasn't worked. What did you learn from that? How do you make your decision making better the next time and the time after that? I think it's also useful to realize that nobody is perfect, and any leader who pretends to be is telling an untruth, because we're all human beings, we're all fallible. And I think that if you are somebody that is approachable, is seen to have that humanistic touch, then people are there to try and help you, and they take pride in helping you to be successful. If you're the kind of leader that's bombastic and autocratic, then you might get it right. But if you are starting to make a few mistakes, people might be reluctant to actually guide you or help you, because you've effectively made your own bed and people are happy for you to lay in it.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, fortunately, that old school, in inverted commas, type of leadership is starting to diminish. And I think what is starting to come more to the forefront, certainly as millennials and zillennials now are starting to make up the largest chunk of the workforce.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They don't want to see leaders who are completely unrelatable to. We want to see individuals that are human, that we can relate to, because if you can't relate to someone that you're following, ultimately it makes it very, very difficult to actually fully engage. And clearly you do that very well within your organization, which I know is incredibly diverse also, which is very, very interesting. And I know from reading some of the pieces that you do and from looking at your background, you are very much one to embrace all different types of communities, because of course you have to do that with the business that you run, given that it is national. And I wondered next whether we might be able to kind of chat a little bit about how we can make our organization reflect those communities that it serves, and the impact of that when it comes to a more holistic leadership, management guidance and kind of, running a successful business.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky early on that one of my managers asked me to go on to a course that was called Common Purpose. And this is an organization that basically was founded many years ago to really try and take the mystery out of society, and to show that whatever role you were in, you were just a piece of a jigsaw of a community that you were part of. I mean, Common Purpose sort of specialised by bringing people maybe from religious organisations, charitable organisations, commercial organisations, public health, the police, the fire brigade, whatever. and you'd be, a young manager sitting in a room with sort of 30 colleagues, all representing completely different organizations, all with perhaps, different ethnic backgrounds, totally different set of circumstances as to who you were. And you probably went into that with a sort of fairly heavy dose of cynicism that, I'm coming from the private sector, how are my public sector or charitable sector colleagues going to react to me, or vice versa? But at the end of a course of shared learning, where you look at the local authorities, the criminal justice system, the rehabilitation of offenders, what society needs to have in taxation to keep the wheels running, and how the income for society is run by commercial enterprises. By the end of it, you realise that whether you call it surpluses or profits, or whether you're managing in a public or a private environment, that actually they're the same issues. You've got the same sort of human strengths and human weaknesses, and you've got an awful lot that you can gain from each other. So even though it was probably 30 years ago since I went on that common purpose program, many of my mentors and people I turned to were people that were on that same course with me. And I think that whether you're using the common purpose vehicle or you're just engaged and working with your local society, we've got so much to learn from each other.
I couldn't agree more, and I really do believe, and this is, as us as an organisation, we believe in peer-to-peer learning and sharing. Ultimately, the best pieces of learning are not necessarily from a textbook, but they are from shared experience, shared guidance, shared wisdom, because that wonderful, eclectic and diverse mix of sectors and individuals there that you discussed are ones that we can often draw the biggest pieces of innovation and wisdom, more holistic understanding from. But I do know Common Purpose quite well. Actually, I was just speaking to someone from Common Purpose the other week, and they do some fantastic things.
They do.
And they're still going strong, and clearly, this ethos of doing business for good and doing business to serve one another, serve our communities, almost servant leadership in some guys, did exist many years ago, which is fantastic. But I think, perhaps the prevalence of common purpose and business for good was perhaps not so apparent within some of your listed type business environments. So it's really, really, really good to see that businesses and charities like yours are starting to really push and pave the way, and other people are able to learn from this, because ultimately I do think that is what the future of business looks like. It's got to be business with the heart first, and certainly it's crises like this that remind you, as you said earlier on, human life and people and business, it's quite fragile in a way. It can only take one epidemic and everything is different. So
absolutely,
we really must embrace one another's differences and uniqueness, and try and be able to collaborate.
Absolutely.
And I wonder, before we kind of head into our lightning round for the session, whether you could just kind of tell me what diversity, inclusion and belonging means to you personally, because I think it sometimes does mean different things to different people, and within your sector I think it's particularly key, and something that I'd love to be able to get the message out there to our listeners.
I mean, we talk about diversity. For me, it's always just felt like common sense and what should be normal. I mean, if we live in a community where we have people of different backgrounds, different ethnicities, obviously, gender, religious persuasion, disabilities, ultimately that is the community and society we're part of. So why shouldn't we create opportunities for everybody in that community to be part of the organisation that you're in? I've almost felt that whatever your postcode is for any of your operations, your organisation should really be a snapshot of the community that you're part of, and it shouldn't be celebrated as a badge for doing something that's unusual or great. It should just be that's how you do things, because that's the society that we're part of. Years ago, I went to run an organisation called Denplan on the south coast, and that was founded by a couple of real visionary dentists.
Part of Denplan, by the way. Little shout out for them. I think I paid my £25 a month.
Well, Denplan's a great success story for another time. the guys that founded it, literally from the get-go, created opportunities so that there was a team that were there with their guide dogs working in administration. There were people who obviously had need for using wheelchairs or had other disabilities. And there are some organizations that even when you're standing in reception, you know that they are a good organization, that there's something special about them. And I think that if you build an organization that is just absolutely intertwined with the community, you're not putting people in a tokenistic way, but you're just saying, we want to make it an organization that anyone can thrive in, then the culture of that organization gets a head start. The teamwork, the productivity, the morale, and the resilience. So I suspect that when we are all through the COVID-19 crisis, the organizations that will basically have done the best are those whose fabric was created the strongest from the community that they serve, and that they'll deserve that success.
You put it so perfectly there. Absolutely, could not agree more. And I think what always shocks me is where businesses say, oh, well, diversity and inclusion and belonging, yes, we do that, we believe in it. And no one actually says, oh, I don't believe in that, which is interesting, of course, because who would? They all say, yes, I would, I completely fundamentally agree with that. But it's not the most important thing at the moment because obviously we've got, COVID or whatever. And to a degree, I kind of get that. But at the same time, I think, well, surely exactly what we're doing in businesses, like you say, that are winning and doing a great job, and the fabric of those organizations is good from the core center. Yeah. Those are the ones that are going to win. Those are the ones that are, making sure there's a huge amount of engagement right now. So that is inclusion. That is inclusion and belonging at its heart and soul. So why would anyone not put inclusion and diversity and belonging at the heart of not only this crisis but kind of business in general? Anyhow, I could again podcast with you about that on another separate subject. But yes, I do like Denplan, so shout out to Denplan. Indeed, they are very, very good. And I think what you say there, actually it's like many other businesses, without sounding like we're being sponsored by Denplan here, is they are the types of organisation where actually anyone has access to something which is going to benefit you long term ultimately, and it is affordable. And hey, who knew back then with Denplan that subscription model would be such a great way to go? I mean, the vast majority of businesses now are all looking at that subscription residual income model. So definitely onto a winner there. But it'd be great to get the co-founders of Denplan onto a podcast actually in the future. Anyhow, going into the lightning round, because I'm realizing that I'm keeping you talking for a huge amount of time here, and I know that you have other things to be doing. But into the lightning round, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer each question. I know you've listened to the podcast before, so you know what is coming. But first and foremost, biggest question first, what has been your secret to success, and any advice that you might be able to impart on aspiring leaders, existing leaders, future leaders?
I think very, very simply, it's not forgetting who you are, where you come from. Not a cliche, but genuinely treat everybody the same wherever they are in an organisation. I think there's a really good way of seeing how good leaders are. If they're respectful and build relationships with people that perhaps are working in supplies, working on reception, working as junior administrators. If they treat them as much as as well as they treat shareholders or trustees, then that probably is a good indication that the values of that person are right. And I've tried to maintain mine throughout my career.
Thank you ever so much. Great points there. And who's been the biggest inspiration to you, whether it be work or personal, professional?
I mean, very simply, for someone that spent most of his career in healthcare, it's the many thousands of doctors and nurses that I've worked with, and obviously now social care workers. The work these guys do every single day is humbling. When you look at the kind of Kim Kardashians and the sort of pop status that sports stars have, and the idols that we create for ourselves. I think perhaps something like COVID-19 is actually showing that sometimes we don't always get our priorities right, and a lot of these guys, particularly in the public sector, are just awesome. So I guess that's my answer.
Absolutely. And talk about heroes, my goodness. I'm just so pleased, albeit we definitely need to put a flag out there for those within your sector and what you represent for sure, as well as
Absolutely.
NHS. So we'll make sure that we put that out and do some shares to hopefully, get some good responses there, which I'm sure we'll achieve. But you're absolutely right. It's not the social media shallow kind of looks pieces with the with the no disrespect to Kim Kardashian and such like, but really those that are on the front line are those real true heroes
Absolutely.
to us. So absolutely agree. And what's authentic leadership to you, Mark?
I think authentic leadership is knowing that when you're doing something, that it comes from the heart as much as from the head. I think you often get people that try and finesse a situation or contrive a situation. I think it's perfectly reasonable if you don't have an answer to ask for help and guidance in forming one. If you've got relevant experience and you've got a strong opinion, then you can share that. But I think no leader should be an intimidating leader that stops challenge or input or to help make decisions better. And I think that if people feel that you're, a human being that's trying to do their best, but it isn't, hugely egotistical and unapproachable, then the organization's probably better protected.
Thank you ever so much. And finally, if you were to give any advice to your younger self, way back when, before you embarked on the corporate and the the SME, entrepreneurial, etc., businesses that you've worked in, or if you're giving advice indeed to someone who's embarking on their career and wondering which way to go, what might you say to that person or the young Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say first of all, if you're in your early 20s and you think you can walk on water, then prepare to get wet, because life has a habit of creating surprises. It's never a straight path for any of us. I probably felt as a 25-year-old that I knew more about everything then than I do now. I now know that I don't know an awful lot, but I've learned who to go to and who to lean on when I do need to have support. And I think the key thing is just try and remain yourself. Don't forget your origins. Stay true to your founding principles, and try and lead a good and fair life for those that are around you.
What a wonderful note to end this podcast on, Mark. Thank you ever so much for being a guest. It's been a joy to have you on the show.
Thank you, Leila. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And by way of a summary, as I always do, plenty of learnings from today. But I think what really struck me most actually about speaking with you, Mark, today is the real kind of salt of the earth leadership approach that you have, if you don't mind me saying so.
No.
And I really hope that listeners who are listening in or watching this on YouTube or on our website can really feel that permeate through when they are watching or listening. I think, to me, that is very much authentic leadership. It is very much being yourself. It is, being, I imagine you being very similar to this as you are, in everyday life. And I think when you give those real life examples when you explain to others that, look, things are not perfect, and you can see the genuine passion and the want and the willingness to absolutely do your best and to almost live as I think you do, to serve others, to serve the community. The community ethos has been woven throughout the entire fabric of this podcast. And I think, very interesting piece that I hope organizations of all different types can take away is that snapshot that you talk about that should be reflective of the organization. So if you have parts of the business up in Manchester or wherever it might be in the UK, make sure that is reflective. Make sure it is reflective of those local heroes, those local champions that are walking the walk, talking the talk day in, day out. And finally, the piece of being true to values. I think if you are, a young leader, or if you're an existing leader, I do believe that the people, as Mark has said, can genuinely tell who cares about their people, from the cleaner and the receptionist up to the board level and the shareholders. All should be treated with equality and with respect. And if you're looking for a new career, do take note of things like that, because it's those small things that really do tend to make a difference and give you the biggest insight into the backbone of the organization. So, again, thanks ever so much, Mark. It's been great to have you on the show. As always, you can check us out online at www.darglobal.org/podcast or www.leilamckenzie.com/podcast. DAR Global stands for Diverse, Inclusive, Aspirational Leaders, and to support all in times of crisis, we are offering a 30-day completely free all access membership to our platform, and we have also created a COVID-19 hub to help support everyone during this unprecedented times, where we will be hearing from leaders like Mark and across various different sectors about responses to the challenges and how we can support with mental health and various other initiatives as we move forward in this together. My name is Leila Mackenzie-Dellis, and you have been listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast, brought to you by DAR Global and with you every week. We are now here twice a week to help support even more in times of change. So do keep an eye out for us. If you'd like to reach out to Mark Adams, please do so. We'll make sure that we put all the information on the end of the podcast for today. All the show notes will be online. And if you've been affected at all by anything in today's show, please do make sure you get in touch with us. Thank you very much again, and we will look forward to seeing you again very soon. And thanks again, Mark. Bye. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.